Hello everyone and welcome to another Yu-Gi-Oh tutorial video. This is the second in the series. The last one I talked about game zones and the general basics of the game. And in this one I'm going to be talking about the phases of the turn, which is kind of confusing, but I'm going to try to break it down and make it a little easier to understand because Yu-Gi-Oh has 6 phases to a turn, I want to say. Yes, 6 phases to a turn, and it's kind of complicated how those phases work. But it is something that you need to know for the basics of the game. So this is my opponent's turn. We'll end here. Now you're going to see that there is a draw phase and a standby phase in a second here, and I'll talk about that. Draw phase, standby phase. So you see that come on the screen. Now, the first phase of any turn is the draw phase, and that's the phase of the turn where you would draw a card. In Yu-Gi-Oh, you start with 5 cards in your hand. You begin the game by drawing 5 cards from your deck. And then at the start of every turn of each of your turns after that, you will draw a card. Now, if you're going second, you draw a card on your first turn. If you're going first, you do not. That wasn't always the case, but it's something they changed later in the game to balance it a little bit because going first is typically an advantage. So you may have noticed that when I first had this up, I only had 5 cards, even though it was my turn, because I started my turn, entered the draw phase, but did not draw a card. Now, most card effects don't really mess with the draw phase. There are some that do. I'm going to see if I can demonstrate that here. I'm going to try to get a certain card in my hand. Here we go. So this is a trap card called Reckless Greed. And what this card does is I draw 2 cards, but then I skip my next 2 draw phases. Drawing 2 cards is a really good effect because Yu-Gi-Oh is all about card advantage and having more cards. But then you skip your next 2 draw phases, which means that those next 2 turns you won't draw. So you're basically just getting cards in advance, but then you pay for it later. So you'll notice that I entered the draw phase and the standby phase there. Okay, and then if I activate this, draw 2 cards immediately. We'll go to end phase. I have to discard because I have too many cards in my hand. It's my opponent's turn. He ends and discards. And you notice I didn't get a draw phase. It just said standby phase because Reckless Greed's effect prevented me from drawing. Skip your draw phase. So there was no draw phase that turn. Now, there aren't that many cards that mess with the draw phase, but there are some, so it's just good to be aware of that. So that's the draw phase. It's drawing. It's pretty much the simplest one. You draw a card. Then there's the standby phase after that, which I'm sure you saw. Now, the standby phase is interesting because it really only affects some cards. And generally, it's cards that say it. The standby phase tends to be cards that require you to pay life points or change something on the field when they occur. And you can't do anything during the draw or standby phase, generally speaking, of your turn. It's not one of the more active parts of the turn. So standby phases is what it sounds like. It's standby. You're kind of on standby when that phase ends. And I'll show you, I could show you with DD Sprite, but I'd rather show with Messenger of Peace what that looks like. So here's Messenger of Peace. Now this is a card. It's a continuous spell. Let's activate that. So that means it's a spell card that stays on the field unless it's destroyed or removed. And it says monsters with 1500 or more attack cannot declare an attack. Once per turn during your standby phase, pay 100 life points or destroy this card. So this is a fairly good card, or it was at least. You know, it's not really meta or anything like that. But any of your opponent's monsters that have more than 1500 attack points cannot attack as long as this card is on the field. And as a price for that, you have to pay 100 life points every standby phase or every your standby phase. There are cards that say every standby phase, which means your opponent's and your own. But this card in particular is just your standby phase. You pay 100 life points, which is not many. I mean, you have 8,000. So 100 is, I don't know, a 16th of that. No, that's not how math works. um, it's 1/80th, I think. Yeah, 100 life points is an 80th of your life points, so it's a very small amount. Um, so I'll go to end phase. Opponent goes into draw and standby, and then we'll go back to my turn. And you'll notice on my standby phase what'll happen. So draw phase, I draw. Standby phase, it's giving me the option pay 100 life points. Now, that's because the wording of this card says pay 100 life points or destroy this card, which means you can choose to destroy Messenger of Peace and not pay its cost. If you had 100 life points left or 50 life points left, for example, you're not going to keep this card because you would then immediately lose the game. So you're going to, you would say no to paying and you would destroy it. But right now I've got 8,000. I want to keep it on the field to protect myself. So I'm going to say yes, I'll pay the 100. It's taking out my life points and I keep the card on the field. So that's a standby phase. Certain effects resolve during that time. Now, even though it doesn't say anywhere, I'm now in main phase 1. So main phase 1 comes directly after draw phase and standby phase. And main phase 1 is one of the most active phases in the game. It's when you're going to set cards, play cards, summon monsters, that kind of thing. You'll notice it gives me the option to activate this spell card. I can set a Reckless Greed because it's a trap. So I'll activate Banner of Courage. Boom, this card makes it so my monsters gain 200 attack during my battle phase. Pretty bad card by today's standards, but it's a classic. And then you see I have the option to summon any of these monsters. So I'll summon Gene Warped Warwolf, the normal summon there. And this is all main phase 1 stuff where this is happening. It's one of the phases in the game where you can do the most stuff. Okay, and then between main phase 1 and main phase 2 is the battle phase. And the battle phase is where, you guessed it, battling takes place. That's when monsters fight each other. And the battle phase, it has its own complications, such as step damage calculation, which I'll talk about in another video. But generally, during the battle phase, there are less things you can do. I can't summon a monster from my hand normally during the battle phase. There are certain cards that say special summon a card, from your hand or from your graveyard or from your deck or whatever during the battle phase. And there are traps and such that can resolve during the battle phase. But generally speaking, it's more restricted than main phase 1 and main phase 2. Now, I would be able to attack right now because it's not my first turn. Can't attack on the first turn, obviously, as your opponent has no way of defending themselves. But it's the third turn. Messenger Peace, however, affects both players. So you see, I'm not given the option to attack with Gene Warped Warwolf because he has over 1,500 attack and therefore cannot attack from Messenger Peace. So my own card is restricting me in this situation. So we're unable to attack and deal any damage. So we'll go right to main phase 2. Main phase 2 is essentially the same as main phase 1. The only difference is that it comes after main phase 1. There are certain cards that say you can only do this during main phase 1 or you can only do this during main phase 2, but they're pretty few and far between. Main phase 1 is where you can set up to go into your battle phase and deal some damage, win the game, try and get rid of some of your opponent's cards. And then main phase 2 is after the battle phase, which means you can't fight anything after you've already had your battle phase. So main phase 2 is more of like preparing for the next turn, getting your field set up, maybe placing some defensive stuff for when your opponent has their turn, stuff like that. So, I can, if I hadn't already summoned this turn, I'd be able to summon one of these guys, but I can set a trap card if I want to. If this was Trap Hole, which I talked about in my other video, then I could, possibly destroy one of my opponent's monsters when they summon it. And that's a good main phase 2 card to put down. So main phase 2, like main phase 1, but comes after battle phase. So its role is slightly different in that way. And then we're going to go to the end phase. And the end phase, like the standby phase, is generally not much happens. But there are card effects that interact with the end phase that resolve during the end phase. So it's good to keep it in mind for that reason. A lot of players say that they end their turns in different way. They'll say in different ways. They'll say pass. They'll say end turn. They'll say enter end phase. Lots of different ways of saying it. But at the end of your turn, you always go into end phase. Okay, so Generally speaking, you always go through all the phases. You can skip battle phase, I believe, but you can't really do that in this app because of the way it's structured. So you see, my opponent's in main phase 1 right now, and you see that they can't just go to main phase 2. But you can just not enter your battle phase. You can go from sorry. I am explaining it poorly. You cannot enter main phase 2 without entering your battle phase. Is a better way of saying it. So, because there's not really a need for a main phase 2 if you have main phase 1 and you don't battle, but you can go straight to end phase, and that skips the battle phase, and I believe it skips main phase 2. Let's see. Yes, it does. And with the discarding that you've been seeing me do here, that's just because you can only have up to 6 cards in your hand. If you have 7 or more, you have to discard so that you only have 6 at the end of your turn. So that's why that's happening. Standby phase, messenger piece. Let's destroy it so that I can attack on my turn with my Warwolf. So we won't pay the cost. Okay. And now you see if I want to attack, I get the little sword icon. I can, in fact, attack directly. Now, lastly, let me just demonstrate an end phase effect. So here we have 2-man cell battle, continuous spell. During each player's end phase, the turn player can special summon 1 level 4 normal monster from their hand. Now, these 2 guys are normal monsters, and we know that because they don't have an effect. See, it just says their type, which is Beast Warrior and Thunder. It does not say /effect. You see on Fire Trooper, it says /effect because he has an effect that he can use on the field. Or Gundari is Spirit effect, which is a special type of monster. And I'll talk more about monster types in my next video, but these 2 guys are not normal monsters. These 2 are because normal monsters have no effect. So 2-man cell battle is a rare card that rare in the sense that it uses the end phase, which not many cards do. So we'll play that. I'll summon my Bolt Penguin. And then during the end phase, you'll see it'll give me the option 2-man cell battle to use the effect. So we are in the end phase. I'm going to say yes, special summon my Gene Warped Werewolf from my hand. And as it says on this card, this is something either player can do. So we'll have my opponent summon Lizard Soldier. Then during his end phase, he is also going to use the effect to benefit off of it and summon Gene Warped Werewolf in attack mode. So to recap, you got draw phase, which is when you draw a card at the start of your turn. Standby phase, which is when certain effects resolve and there are certain actions that can be taken in response to said effects. Main phase 1, which is where you're going to do most of your playing, summoning monsters, settings, traps, playing spells. And then you have battle phase, which is when you're going to actually battle other monsters, destroy monsters, deal damage to your opponent's life points. Main phase 2, which is more gameplay stuff that happens after your battle phase, such as summoning monsters. And then end phase, which is just when your turn ends and there are certain effects that resolve that involve the end phase. I hope that's helpful. I hope that's not super confusing. It's difficult with these videos to kind of know which order to go in because to explain one concept, you have to talk about others. So I'm going to go ahead and say that maybe they're not necessarily in an order. And it might be good to go back and rewatch older videos after watching some of my newer videos so that you kind of understand how concepts tie together. But I'll also be making videos that demonstrate a lot of concepts together. And that's going to do it for this video on turn phases. Thanks for watching.